As usual, when I think about what I want to present at the CAC-PIAC meeting, I start thinking about what kind of questions have we seen from members in the past year? What kind of tools can we give you guys to help you go back to the state to answer those questions? And what do you really need to know about? So with that in mind, I came up with the hodgepodge of issues that we'll be discussing today. First two flow nicely from the previous presentation. They are a couple in-the-weeds Affordable Care Act issues. In the weeds because not everybody has paid a lot of attention to them, and they definitely will affect you. I'll also be speaking just briefly about the APMA Recoupment Model Law Project, which will be rolling out in the near future. I'll introduce that and let you know what APMA has in store for you. And because we've had a lot of questions lately about Medicare Advantage plans and audits, I'll do a brief update on Medicare Advantage. So we'll start with the ACA non-discrimination clause. And it's important, so I'll go ahead and read it because the words are important in this clause. It basically says that a group health plan and a health insurance issuer offering group or individual health coverage shall not discriminate with respect to participation under the plan or coverage against any health care provider who's acting within the scope of that provider's license or certification under applicable state law. The provision goes forward and it has a few caveats or clarifications. The first one basically says that it can't be construed as an any willing provider law. And the second one says that it won't prevent a health plan from establishing varying reimbursement rates based on quality or performance measures. The scope of this law is actually very important to note. It applies to self-insured employee health benefit plans. Those are those ERISA plans that are usually exempt from state law. It applies to group health insurance plans, employer group plans that are insured, and individual health insurance. So it's a pretty broad scope, and it does include those individual and small group products sold in the exchanges. It would not apply to grandfathered plans, and those are a very technical definition that we were afraid at first would include a lot of plans, but increasingly it appears it's not going to include many. They're employer group plans that don't change important aspects of their plan so that they can avoid application of some of the health care reform provisions. It wouldn't apply to Medicaid, and it wouldn't apply to Medicare. So, of course, the question to ask is, does it provide any meaningful protection? And I think we're used to, when we see an anti-discrimination provision, APMA looks at three factors. There's always three factors we'd like to see. We'd like to see protection against discrimination in coverage, and the ACA law does provide that. We like to see protection against discrimination in participation, and by participation, the terms of participation, whether a health plan could, for example, just decide that it wasn't going to have podiatrists in its network. The ACA does have that protection against discrimination participation, and we like to see protection against discrimination and reimbursement. That last one I don't see in the ACA language. Actually, I'll talk about that. Some people have thought because the law has that provision that clarifies that it doesn't prevent health plans from discriminating or paying providers different amounts based on quality or performance, that somehow that indicates that there is some kind of reimbursement guarantee. But we've seen similar laws and haven't seen it interpreted in that manner. I think what they were trying to do there, the legislative intent, was to make some clarity around choosing different types of providers to be subject to quality and performance measures. And we've seen that in states where, only primary care providers, for example, will be subject to certain bonus or quality or performance payments. So the discrimination in coverage, and this is the real meat of this provision and where it provides some meaningful protection. Basically, if service is covered when it's furnished by an MD or a DO, this provision guarantees that it would be covered when it's furnished by a podiatrist as long as it's in the podiatrist's scope of licensure. So while you could put a limit on a specific benefit, say 5 visits for routine foot care, you could not put a limit that said 5 visits to a podiatrist annually. So there is some meaningful protection in this law. So if an MD and DO can provide the service and it's covered under the plan, a DPM can provide the service and it's covered under the plan. There cannot be discrimination based on that. So just to provide some perspective on how that coverage discrimination provision plays out, and also to give you some advice about what you can do in your states to make sure that that is appropriately enforced and understood. I'll speak briefly about the essential health benefits that are part of healthcare reform. And the health plans are required to offer the individuals in small groups inside and outside of the exchanges, and these are both small group plans and individual plans. They have to cover the essential health benefits, which we heard about before. And essential health benefits are defined in 2 ways. There's a list of 10 benefits included in the ACA, and they're broad, not very specific. And then each state is obligated to designate a benchmark plan. And there are 10 potential benefit packages the states can choose from as benchmarks. I won't go into a lot of detail, but they're like the top 3 small group plans, the state employee benefit plan, the top 3 federal employee benefit plans, and the largest commercial HMO in the state. Now, by far, it appears that states are choosing the small group health plans as the plans that will be their essential health benefit plans. And they'll take a look at those plans. They will ensure that they have those 10 benefits that are in the legislation, and they will ensure that they otherwise comply with law. And there's a URL, though, there. This is a great place to go to see what your state has chosen for the essential health benefit package. In some cases, they actually have links to the evidence of coverage, so you can go right in and see what kind of services would be covered under that package. So that's very useful. The nice thing about the non-discrimination provision is you can focus on what services are covered rather than what types of physicians are covered. You don't have to go in and say, do they quote unquote cover services furnished by podiatrists, because the non-discrimination provision should make that a non-issue. You can go in and see when is routine foot care covered or for what populations. As I mentioned, the chosen benchmark plan does have to be modified, however, to comply with law. And some of those laws, for example, if the chosen benchmark plan had a lifetime limit on services, that would have to be taken out because the ACA prohibits those types of limitations. In the same sense, these benchmark plans need to be revised if they do have any limitations that would violate the non-discrimination law. So it is worth your time to take a look, see what your state has chosen, if your state's chosen. If they haven't chosen, the federal government chooses, and the fallback is the most popular small group health plan in the state. Take a look at those benefits, and if you see limitations on services furnished by podiatrists, what you want to do is make sure that the state understands that that violates the ACA non-discrimination provision, and that is one of the changes that needs to be made to that essential health benefit package. I'll skip now to the ACA claims regulations. So as part of the enabling regulations for the ACA, they created these regulations around claims. And these are actually already effective. What they did is they went in and they amended the ERISA rules. They added an external appeal process, an independent review organization process. They expanded the definition of a claimant, and they expanded the applicability of the law. So what used to be the ERISA claims regulations now apply to insured and self-insured health plans and individual plans. Again, grandfathered plans are exempt, but they have to comply with the pre-amended regulations. It's important to note that these rules, serve as a floor. State law can be more stringent. So, for example, to the extent that the ACA claims regulation has a 30-day prompt payment provision, if your state provides a 15-day prompt payment provision, then your state law would apply. And it does regulate that type of topic. Prompt payment, content of adverse determination notices, timelines for review, and the appeal process are regulated under these regs. One important new right I think that a lot of people haven't realized they have under these regulations is that the ACA process applies to claimants, which is usually plan beneficiaries, and their authorized representatives. And that means by becoming an authorized representative, you can step into the shoes of your patient and take advantage of their rights. And there are some important rights there. The two most important that I see is it gives you the right to receive assignment, and I know that that can be a problem at times, and it gives you the right to use the beneficiary appeal process as set forth in the ACA if you want to choose to use that process. So why are these important rights? Well, I know sometimes if a physician is non-contracted with a plan, and I know some of the Blues plans are particularly bad about this, the plan chooses to pay the patient rather than the physician for the services, and then the physician has to chase down the patient to get paid. If the plan's covered by the claims rules, and remember this is pretty broad, it's the employer group plans, it's the self-insured, it's the insured, it's the individual plans, then they would have to recognize the right of assignment if the patient appoints the physician as an authorized provider or an authorized representative, actually, for purposes of payment. So that practice would quit if you knew what you needed to do to become an authorized representative. And with regard to appeals, in a lot of instances, states don't regulate appeals for contracted providers. They figure that that is a subject of negotiation between the providers and the health plan, and we know how much negotiation actually goes on. So you don't see a lot of state laws around that. They tend to focus on the appeals process for non-contracted providers. Sometimes the appeals process can be pretty lame for contracted providers, and sometimes states, even for non-contracted providers, don't have robust appeals rules. So you can choose now, as an authorized representative, if you fill out the paperwork, send that in, the appeals process you would like to use when a claim's denied. You could use the ACA process if that's the best process available to you. The ACA requires that notice of adverse decision has to include certain information, and that's information so you can adequately identify the claim, which seems like a no-brainer, but isn't always the case. It includes the date of service, the provider, the patient, and the plan now has to make available, and this is, to the patient as well, the diagnosis code and the treatment code if they ask for it, and they have to explain what that means. The claimant has 180 days to appeal. And I'll say I am focusing here on post-service appeals versus appeals trying to get prior authorization or concurrent review. There are some regulations around that as well that are actually pretty stringent with regard to the timelines. But my focus here is on those post-service reviews where you're trying to get paid for the service you furnished. If in the appeal, the health plan does have to have a health professional with appropriate training and experience review the claim. If it's for medical necessity, they don't necessarily have to take the advice of that professional, but they do have to be involved in the process. Another right that happens in these appeals, and again, if you were an authorized representative, you would have that right, is the claimant can see the relevant claim file with no charge, so they could see what it is in the claim file, what information the plan based its decision on. So plans are required, they can have 1 or 2 levels of internal appeal. They only get 60 days of deliberation time. So if it's 1 level of appeal, they have to make their decision in 60 days for a post-service claim. If it's 2 levels, each level they have 30 days to make their decision. And if they somehow violate the rules around their internal appeals procedure, you are deemed to have exhausted your internal appeal rights, and you can go directly to the external appeal right. And there's this new external appeal entity. It's contracted by the state, could be multiple entities, independent review organizations. They will be contracted subject to the NAIC Model External Review Act, and you can go to them if you don't like the health plan decision and appeal the health plan decision. There is a $25 fee, which is refundable if you, they can charge up to $25 actually. There isn't necessarily a fee, it's up to them, but they can charge up to $25. The appealable issues are those involving medical necessity and rescissions of coverage. And there's no minimum money amount involved in order to do an independent review organization determination. It may be a federal or state external review entity, depending on, for example, if it's a self-insured plan, there will be a federal system for those, and then your insured plans and individual plans will have state systems. A really nice resource for learning more about the claims regs and actually the ACA in general is the Department of Labor website. And they have FAQs about the ACA claims procedure. This one basically focuses on the fact that in order to be in compliance with the rules regarding claims, plans can't make it unduly burdensome to become an authorized representative. It says you can have a form and require that a form be filled out, but you can't make it difficult to be recognized as an authorized representative. This question underscores that a simple assignment of benefits is not enough to become an authorized representative. You really have to specify what you're authorized for in that form for the health plan to recognize it. And this question explains that potentially an authorized representative's able to get all the notices that would normally go to the patient. And for that reason, you really need to be specific about what it is you're authorized for. And I think probably in the future, while plans will have different requirements, APMA will provide some guidance around what exactly you need to say in those appointment of authorization forms to get assignment, to be able to appeal for the member, to make sure you get those EOBs that include all the language that the member is eligible to receive. The final thing I'll address is Medicare Advantage, because APMA continues to get questions about Medicare Advantage audits and record requests. And to put this into some perspective, I'll talk about why you're seeing so many, because a lot of my clients are Medicare Advantage plans, and I'm seeing this activity as well. Part of the ACA was to provide for a 6-year phase down in the payments that Medicare Advantage organizations receive. At the same time, it created what is known as a star rating system, and it's based on some of the HEDIS measures, and it provides payment bonuses for highly rated plans, and also it provides that if you continually get poor ratings, you can lose your Medicare Advantage contract. So as a result of all that going on, there is an increased focus on getting diagnostic data. As you'll recall, those Medicare Advantage plans get paid a risk-adjusted payment, and in order to get paid an amount that reflects the risks of the beneficiaries, they need all the diagnoses codes that are in your records to turn in to make sure their payment is optimized. There's also an increased focus on getting quality information so they can increase their star ratings and potentially get those payment bonuses to offset some of the payment decreases. So we're seeing a lot of activity around these two items, lots of record requests. In addition, CMS just released a new fraud, waste, and abuse chapter of the Medicare Managed Care Manual, and it requires MAOs to engage in certain payment integrity activity. Basically, MAOs have to act as if they were fee-for-service RACs or ZPICs or some of those entities. Interestingly, the record limit, record request limits that apply under fee-for-service don't apply to Medicare Advantage plans, but then again, they're asking for records for a variety of reasons. So that's why you're seeing that increase. And what I would say is if you're a contracting provider, your rights with regard to responding to all these record requests are in your contracts. It's whatever's in your contracts, and frequently it won't be spelled out. It'll say, you agree to comply with the provider manual, which will say you'll provide all the records we want at no cost. I will tell you, I am seeing, because the diagnostic data is so important to the plans voluntarily paying for that diagnostic data. If you're a non-contracting provider to a Medicare Advantage organization, you can certainly ask to be paid for it. State law regarding payment for medical records won't apply. It'll be preempted as it applies to Medicare Advantage plans. But you can certainly ask to be paid for any of your medical records, and you can certainly object and see if the plan will back down or decrease the amount of records. There have been a lot of questions about, well, if I'm non-contracting, am I even obligated to provide these record requests? If they're asking for records to support payment, probably, because the Medicare Advantage organizations are required to pay non-contracting providers what they would have received under fee-for-service. And under fee-for-service, if they request records, there's authority for them not to pay you. So if it's to support payment, you probably are obligated, if you want to get paid, to produce the records that support the payment you're requesting. Diagnostic data, not really a lot of authority there to request that data from non-contracting providers. Again, though, most plans are happy to pay for it because they need that information in order to get paid appropriately by CMS.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Yeah, a very informative lecture, and certainly sparks a lot of interest and questions. And